on, Vikings, let's win this game.
Vikings fans, things are heating up in Minnesota. The plan for the 2026 NFL Draft is revealing a hole in the offense that needs an answer fast, and one name is emerging as a major option to fill the WR3 spot after Jalen Nailor left. On top of that, there is a heated debate over playing time for an important name, real tension around the offense, and a heavy read on where this team is headed. And trust me, that last story in this breakdown hits harder than you think. Let's get started. The Vikings offense is getting into that frustrating part of the roster where everybody looks at the top two names and thinks everything is settled. It is not. There is an open spot behind them that could change snaps, packages, and even the way Kevin O'Connell spreads the passing game around. That is exactly why this pre-draft movement caught the attention of people who live and breathe Vikings football. There is a clue there, a real one. Jalen Nailor's departure left a real hole in that wide receiver room. A lot of people look at Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and stop the evaluation right there. But a roster does not live on a starting duo alone. When you think about a long season, rotation, injuries, red zone work, and formation adjustments, that third receiver matters a lot. And that matters now, not later. To put it plainly, this is the kind of detail that feels small in April and turns into a weekly topic once the ball is flying for real in September. The most interesting part is the type of receiver Minnesota is looking at. On top 30 visits, the team brought in names with a very specific profile. Jeff Caldwell, Ted Hurst, C.J. Daniels, and Dejon Stribling are all part of that conversation. That is not a coincidence. We are talking about taller targets, outside receivers, that boundary receiver profile, the classic X. It sends a pretty clear message. The staff seems to want more size and more physical presence outside the numbers. And yeah, that changes the whole picture. When you compare that setup to last year's group, the difference jumps out. The main trio in 2025 was smaller. Now the Vikings seem to be looking for somebody above 6'2", with length, reach, and the ability to stretch coverage along the sideline. That does not just affect WR3. It could also free up Jordan Addison even more on inside alignments, where he could cook slot corners all game long. And that is where this gets interesting. Just like that, the offense takes on a different look without having to reinvent everything. There is also the Ty Felton factor in all of this. He was a third-round pick in 2025 and still has not shown firm signs that he has taken over that job. Could that change in camp? Sure, absolutely. But right now, that feels more like hope than certainty. At the same time, Miles Price has been putting in a lot of work this offseason and brings real juice in the return game. But returning kicks is one thing. Holding down a steady role on offense is something completely different. That is where the projection gets tricky. This is a fan in the stands kind of read, the kind not many people slow down and really work through. So the name that stands out most in this block is Jeff Caldwell. Not because he is already the answer, but because he represents exactly the archetype Minnesota appears to be chasing. A tall outside receiver who complements Jefferson and Addison instead of copying what they already do. Let me know in the comments if you are seeing that same message from the front office, because the next story moves this from roster theory to a much bigger decision point. But this WR3 storyline does not stop at prospect profile. It got even more interesting once a major update surfaced about the top of this class. Minnesota is sitting at pick number 18 in the draft, and there is growing belief that a very talented receiver could fall right into that range. If that happens, everything changes. Then it stops being just a search for depth and becomes a chance to grab a player who could reshape the offense right away. The name that entered this conversation hard is Mekhi Lemon. Ian Rappaport pointed to the expectation that he could go somewhere between pick 16 and 18. That alone is enough to get fans up out of their seats. Not because the Vikings are guaranteed to take him, but because the simple fact that he could still be there when Minnesota is on the clock opens up a bunch of different possibilities. There is the path where they take him outright. There is the path where they trade back. And there is the pressure that kind of board situation puts on the entire draft room. That is where one decision can shift the whole night. If Lemon is really still available at that point, the logic gets pretty simple. You look at Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and see two major names, but you also notice the group behind them lacks real depth and size. Jalen Nailor's departure made that gap even more obvious. So the question changes. Instead of asking, do the Vikings need a receiver, it becomes, can they really pass on a talent like this if he falls right into their lap? And honestly, that is a very fair question. There is another factor that carries real weight here. Jordan Addison's contract future is hanging over this conversation too. At some point, Minnesota will have to decide how it sees this receiver group over the long term. So taking a wide receiver early would not just be reacting to the present, it would also be a way to prepare the offense for what comes next without having to scramble later. That kind of move can seem excessive if you only look at the surface, but it makes a lot more sense when you step back and look at the whole roster. Now, if the team decides the draft is not the best way to fill that opening, another option showed up, and this one brings memory, pride, and a little drama with it. The name connected to that route is Stefon Diggs. Yes, that's Stefon Diggs. The idea would be a reunion to take the spot behind Jefferson and Addison if his legal situation gets resolved, and you can already picture the fan base splitting right down the middle. Some people would bring him back in a heartbeat, others would not even want to discuss it. To be completely honest with you, this is exactly the kind of topic that lights up bars, group chats, and video comment sections in about 5 minutes. Mekhi Lemon represents youth, upside, and draft investment. Stefon Diggs represents experience, immediate impact, and all the emotional weight that name still carries in Minnesota. There is no clean answer here. There is risk on both sides. There is a bet on both sides. That is why this story picked up so much steam so fast. In the end, what stands out the most is that the Vikings seem to be exploring every door without shutting any of them too early. That is a good thing, but it also shows the WR3 problem is more serious than it looked a few weeks ago. And from here, the conversation gets even more specific. Quick ask before we keep rolling. Subscribe to the channel and jump into the comments too. Your opinion really matters here. When a top 30 visit shows up, a lot of people brush it off as random smoke. I do not buy that so easily. Sometimes it does not turn into a pick, sure. But when a team with a clear need at a position spends time on a specific player, I stop and pay closer attention. And in this case, the name that hit the radar hard was Jeff Caldwell. He did not land in this conversation by accident. This is one of those stories that calls for patience. Jeff Caldwell is not entering this class as the most polished receiver in the group. He is also not coming in with the kind of huge production that makes everybody stamp him as a future star before camp even starts. But what he does bring is the kind of physical toolbox that makes coaches lose sleep over what they could turn him into. And that is where upside starts to matter. The guy has plenty of size, a strong build, and speed that jumps off the screen. When a prospect puts all of that together, he becomes a serious swing even if he is still unpolished. And that is when the conversation stops being about dry numbers and starts becoming about upside. The thing that really lit up this discussion was the combination of measurements and explosion. Caldwell was listed at close to 6'5" and more than 215 pounds, with an eye-popping 40-yard dash time. That is not common. Not at that size. Not moving like that. And when that kind of profile shows up, teams start imagining vertical shots, contested catches, red zone presence, and that sideline receiver who stretches the field without needing 10 targets a game. That is exactly why the connection to Minnesota makes sense. The Vikings do not need Jeff Caldwell to walk in and save the offense. That changes the weight of the evaluation a lot. With Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison already commanding attention, a potential WR3 could come in without the pressure of carrying the room right away. That is huge for a developmental player. He can grow into specific packages, learn how to read coverages, clean up routes, build confidence, and slowly earn more space. And if that works, the value could be real. To me, that is the ideal setup for a prospect like this. No panic, no overreaction, no rushing the process. There is also a roster-building detail here that not enough people take the time to talk through. Minnesota has enough draft capital to chase upside at certain spots without getting desperate for immediate answers everywhere. When you have a competitive roster, one of the smartest moves you can make is taking a swing on raw talent at the right point on the board. And Jeff Caldwell feels exactly like that type of swing. He does not feel like a headline move. He feels like something a coaching staff does when it truly believes in its ability to develop players. And let me tell you, sometimes that is worth a lot. To be completely honest with you, this is one of those reads that impatient fans usually push back on early, because a lot of people want a ready-made name, instant production, and an easy answer. But strong rosters are also built by preparing the next layer before urgency hits for real. That is why this visit cannot be treated like some throwaway pre-draft footnote. There is real planning in this. There is a fit conversation in this. There is a role-based vision inside this story. Tell me in the comments if you would buy into that Jeff Caldwell bet, or if you would rather go after somebody more polished, because the next story shifts from projection to a quarterback battle that could change the whole temperature of the team. In the middle of this battle for space on offense, the team's most sensitive discussion might be happening under the helmet. The quarterback position is heating up again, and it was not because of some explosive press conference or a dramatic open practice. It was because of a clip. One short off-season clip was enough to reignite comparison, doubt, and that debate the fan base just cannot let go of. And this time, the two names at the center of it are Kyler Murray and J.J. McCarthy. It all started because a training throw from Murray showed a release that looked a whole lot like one of the things McCarthy was heavily criticized for last year. That leg whip after the throw, that mechanical finish that a lot of people in Minnesota had already pointed to as a problem. The irony hit right away, because McCarthy had taken serious heat for that exact issue. Kevin O'Connell had even spoken publicly about trying to get him into a more repeatable body position, with firmer posture and better foot placement. Then Murray shows up on video doing something similar, and just like that, the conversation explodes again. But this is where everybody needs to slow down a little. One clip does not complete a quarterback evaluation. It does not even complete a practice evaluation, let alone a season. It was one throw in the middle of many. You cannot write a player off over a short social media clip, but you also cannot pretend the comparison did not land hard, because it did, especially for a fan base that spent much of 2025 trying to figure out whether McCarthy was really developing or just surviving inside the system. That spark landed on dry grass. The bigger weight of this story is not even the mechanics themselves. It is what they represent inside the battle for the job. Murray showed up with experience, range, and a very different style. More shotgun, more quick game, more movement outside structure. And what makes this even more interesting is that Kevin O'Connell has already started talking publicly about schematic ideas that line up pretty well with that profile. When the head coach opens the door to those kinds of adjustments, that sends a strong message. It does not guarantee a starting job, of course, but it does suggest the offense may be getting shaped in ways that help the veteran. That is why people are paying close attention. Meanwhile, McCarthy is trying to sell the right response through his off-season work. The word is that he has been grinding on his mechanics, cleaning up bad habits, and doing everything he can to protect his spot. He has to. After a season where his accuracy and consistency fell short, any visible improvement becomes critical. The problem is that he is no longer just fighting his own mistakes. Now he is also fighting the sense that Murray entered the room with a built-in edge. And that matters. It matters a lot. To be completely honest with you, this debate has become less about who has more raw talent and more about which quarterback the team seems more willing to build around right now. That is the uncomfortable part. Because if Minnesota really does adjust package, rhythm, and structure for Murray, then McCarthy is going to have to play even better to make up that ground. That is the kind of fan read you do not hear every day. And stay with me, because the next story turns the heat up even more. It touches a first-round investment, the pecking order on defense, and one very uncomfortable question in Minnesota. And this is where the conversation rises to another level. Because now we are not just talking about roster tweaks or draft bets anymore. We are talking about how the rest of the league is looking at the Vikings right now. And when that outside red turns harsh, it hits differently for people who follow this team every single day. The name that opens this story is still Dallas Turner, but it quickly grows into the heart of the team, the quarterback situation. Dallas Turner is still stuck in that uncomfortable zone where the talent is obvious, but the real opportunity has not caught up yet. He was a high draft pick. He arrived with major expectations. He looked like a piece who should matter to both the present and the future. But Jonathan Greenard and Andrew Van Ginkel are still ahead of him in the rotation, and they have earned it. That keeps Turner in a role nobody expected him to stay in for this long. It is not a lack of talent. It is a lack of a clear fit. And when that happens, fans start asking the question nobody inside the building wants to hear. What is the actual plan for this guy? The situation gets even heavier when you connect that to the team's overall image. Bleacher Report placed the Vikings among the worst quarterback situations in the NFL for 2026. That did not go unnoticed. The criticism came hard at J.J. McCarthy, pointing to how much he struggled last season, and it also came at Kyler Murray because of his recent injury history and the doubts about his consistency. Does that sting? Of course it does. But you also cannot act like that criticism came out of nowhere. There is a reason the league is looking sideways at this quarterback battle. McCarthy is still carrying the weight of a season that fell well below expectations. The accuracy wobbled, the confidence wavered, the mechanics became a recurring talking point. On the other side, Murray brings more experience, more improvisation, and a ceiling that has flashed at a very high level before. But he also arrives with question marks attached. So the way a lot of outsiders are framing it is pretty simple. Minnesota has two options, but neither one brings real peace right now. And for a team trying to compete immediately, that is a big problem. That is the part that lingers. To be completely honest with you, the most frustrating part of this read is that it mixes truth with exaggeration. Yes, there is risk. Yes, there is uncertainty. But there is also more talent in this offense than a lot of rushed analysis wants to admit. Kevin O'Connell still has weapons, still has protection, and still has two quarterbacks who could produce more than the April narrative is projecting. Even so, the criticism is out there. And when you combine the uncertainty around Dallas Turner with the pressure on Kyler Murray and J.J. McCarthy, the picture gets rough. It is not a full-blown crisis, but it is definitely not calm either. What stays with you after this whole breakdown is pretty simple. The Vikings are at a point where every decision carries more weight. The offense is still searching for an answer at WR3. New names are entering the picture. The quarterback battle is getting serious, and the defense still has a major investment waiting for clarity. Put all of that together, and you get a roster with enough talent to compete, but not much room for careless mistakes. Drop your take in the comments because this space is for everyone who lives and breathes Vikings football. And right now, this team does not leave room for shallow analysis because anybody who feels this in their chest knows exactly how much is on the line. Stay tuned. SKOL Vikings, let's go!